Thank you. So my master's project is on the role of vessel-based tourism on the masking of Antarctic humpback whales. So I really want to sort of start talking about the addressing of sources of anthropogenic noise pollution. Noise pollution is sort of it's kind of a silent killer because it's not really addressed or not really able to understand the impacts of it because it's noise. So there's several different types of anthropogenic noise, and the airgun seismic survey is the main one, and then there is also the shipping noise and the sonar anthropogenic noise. They've also started to study the impacts of putting in wind farms on offshore wind farms, as well as the pile driving for underwater construction projects. So sound is in water versus air. Sound travels 5 times faster. So it travels about 1,500 meters per second versus in air where it travels 300. So the marine creatures use sound as a primary sensory modality to be able to communicate, to be able to forage, to be able to find mates, to be able to avoid predators, and be able to communicate with conspecific, specifically with like mother and calves. The sound, my specific topic is going to be focusing on the sound exposure from shipping and vessels, because low frequency sound has become a large problem because of the fact that it has very long wavelengths, and therefore it travels a lot further throughout the water column and can affect a larger area. And there's become a lot of global concern about this with international initiatives, including the International Ocean Noise Coalition, as well as the Global Alliance for Managing Ocean Noise. So there's separate sounds. There's like an impulsive sound that comes from the seismic air guns, which will radiate. It's still a low frequency sound, but it tends to be more of an impulsive sound. The shipping or vessel noise is a continuous sound. So the types of impacts that this can cause on marine mammals is the vascular damage to the brain. So it can hemorrhage, it can cause the heart to erupt, and very deep diving animals experience what's called a decompression sickness. It's similar to when you surface too fast if you're scuba diving, because they get scared when they hear the noises, and then they go to the surface too fast and they get nitrogen stored in their organs and blood, and it can cause their heart and brains to hemorrhage and rupture. You can also have behavioral changes, which they can avoid, like critical foraging and breeding habitat. You can have issues with stranding because they aren't able to navigate through their environment because they use the sound and similar to when you want to click, you hear the echolocation. They use that to be able to understand their environment and the level of water, and when they can't hear very well, they'll sometimes beach themselves. There's also increases in like the cortisol levels, which can impact their immunity, which can cause a higher susceptibility to disease. And then I'll address the masking of critical communication cues. So I'll give you a little background information about Antarctica, because that was where I did my study. So there was an International Geophysical Year in 1957 and 1958, where a lot of scientists decided to collaborate and study Antarctica, and decided that they would pass this treaty to have no military presence, and it was to promote peace and science, and 12 different countries signed it. During that time between 1958 and 1980, they did try to have some mining activities down there, which was declined by the United States and Argentina. And they passed this Convention of the Conservation of Antarctic Living Resources to manage some of this stuff, to be able to eradicate the mining down there and to regulate any of the fishing, especially for krill and toothfish, mostly done by Australia. Then in 1991, they passed the Madrid Protocol in 1991, which is in the Annex 4, there's a prevention of marine pollution. And under the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea, they declare that noise should be considered a pollutant, as well as the International Maritime Organization. There's also a nonprofit that was founded in 1991 called the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. They originally only had 7, but you can see from the graph that it's drastically increased from 1992 to 2018. Obviously, with COVID, it's decreased much more, but the tourism season is between late October and early March, and which is right when all of the mammals are down there feeding and foraging, which is a very hard spectral, temporal, and spatial overlap. They've also started using this quote called the last chance tourism, like let's go see it before it melts, which has exacerbated an already problem with climate change and things like that. So what exactly is masking? Masking is an acoustic interference that occurs when both the signal and the masking noises are of similar frequencies. So you can see on the graph that there's the really long strands are the shipping noises, and they produce like a very long, a broadband frequency. And then in the small box, there's the upcalls of a fin whale, and you can see where it masks the certain parts that are really critical for them to be able to communicate over these long distances. And here's a diagram that helps demonstrate. So this was created by Chris Clark, who did a study in the Gulf of Maine with right whales, and they were trying to detect so that the small little lights are their vocalization calls and their frequency levels. And then you can see what happens once I play. What happens when a ship comes in. So it completely disrupts their communication channels because they can no longer be able to like forage and communicate with each other or communicate with their calves. So my particular species of interest for my study were humpback whales. They're highly migratory. The southern whale humpbacks, they feed mainly on the krill species in the Antarctic waters from the austral summer to between October and April, which overlaps the high cruise ship season with the increased activity. They produce low frequency vocalizations between 113 and 157 hertz. And the average cruise ship emit frequencies between 100 and 500 hertz. However, this really depends on the size and the speed and the design of the ship. So determining masking is very, very difficult with baleen whales because you can see on the bottom part of this graph, the black line, that's the baleen whales, and it's because we don't really understand their hearing level and their sensitivity range, because we aren't able to, like with the odontocetes, which are smaller cetacean species, the killer whale, the harbor porpoise, the harbor seal, those studies were done in captivity where they were able to use an automatic auditory response device to actually know what their sensitivity range was. They've only tried to do that with stranded baleen whales since they're so large, but the studies have not been have not shown any type of real certainty. So, and it's very highly, as you can see with the graph, it's highly variable among species, and there's a lot of complicating factors with how sound travels. It depends on bathymetry, it depends on if there's ice sheets, it depends on if there is the type of soil, all these other like complicating factors. So my case study objective was one to establish difference in signal to noise ratio with and then without ships. And then I predicted how much vessel noise contributes to the ambient noise levels. I also wanted to determine the spatial, spectral, and temporal overlap of the vessels with the humpback whales, and then understand and integrate an acoustic footprint into the ecosystem-based management strategies. So my methods were our team went down to Antarctica, and we did it in 2 different years. So we tagged 10 whales in 2009 and 10 whales in 2010 with what was called a D-tag, which is a non-invasive suction cup. And once the tags are recorded, there's a continuous monitoring of their movement and their vocalization. So it's recorded simultaneously. So we try to match the behaviors with the vocalizations being produced. So part of the acoustic analysis is I used a software called Raven 1.5. This is an image of a spectrogram. So that's where you can see a visual representation of sound. So if you can see the box in number 3 represents one of the whale vocalizations versus the box in number 10 where there's not. And then you create what's known as a signal to noise ratio to see how far above their signal is producing based on the ambient environment conditions. So when establishing a signal to noise ratio, it indicates how much louder the signal is than the background ambient noise. It also can provide a baseline measurement to determine the changes in the soundscape of the area. With my DTAG data, I was able to figure out an average signal of a ratio and intensity of all the tags, which was 123.6. Which had to be converted to decibels because that's how sound has to be converted. So if you have even a slight change, because it's on a logarithmic scale, it can be with intensity, it can cause a drastic impact even over 1 or 2 dBs. You can see with the first whale, which is MN21A, we believe that was based on our visual observations from the boat, that was a mother and calf pair, which tend to not vocalize as with higher vocalization levels because they're trying to avoid predators, especially orca whales. So, and then in MN, the higher one, MN 151A was we believe was a male and was probably singing, because they do a courtship song that, even though that's usually done in the breeding grounds, sometimes it can start in the feeding grounds. So I did a mapping, and this is a static representation of a very dynamic situation, but the graph, or the map on the left shows you that this whale that's located right here where a shipping lane is cannot hear this whale that's only like 50 yards away. The other map on the right shows you where we tag the whales, and then where I plotted the data from the automatic identification system for marine traffic from specifically cruise vessels, and tried to do a noise density calculation of how much overlap there was of where they were located. However, because when we tagged the locations, that was done during the austral fall. And they tend to be more enclosed in the bays because the primary food that they eat, which is krill, recedes back into some of the sea ice. And so in the actual austral summer, they are they're found much more in the channel where you see the highlighted density matters. So the possible consequences of this is an inability to cooperatively feed. So you can see on the picture on the very top, that is a bunch of humpback whales that they do a very communicating way of, one does like a bubble net feeding, and they go down, and then they corral the fish, and then they all come up and are able to take up as much and maximize their energy uptake. So that it's very important for them to be able to hear each other and understand who's playing what role in the feeding dynamic. It also causes them an inability to find conspecifics, especially calves and mates, and avoidance of critical foraging habitat. So when they hear shipping, sometimes it's this chronic continuous noise, they'll just go to a different place and then won't be able to be in the area where most of their prey availability is. Again, it can have potential problems with navigating, causing them to bump into things, not be able to hear predators, not be able to find the food. And then they also will change their vocalizations. There's been a lot of documented studies about them changing the vocalizations, and they don't know the population consequence of disturbance with that. So we don't know if that causes more energy, if that causes different issues. There's also trophic linkages. So we have, there's documented studies of low frequency shipping noise to impact a lot of crustacean, as well as invertebrates, all mussel types. And those are some of the main predators, some of the main prey of some of these whales. Some of the fish get impacted. There's been studies where it can zooplankton all the way up to the top level predators. So this is a screenshot of the US East Coast with the and the Western Antarctic Peninsula. So you can obviously see that there's much higher vessel traffic on the US East Coast from all the shipping and all the other things, and there's very little density as of right now, but it's still increasing. And it's a pristine habitat that we can hopefully still be able to preserve if we reach it in time. So I wanted to go over some of my management implications. So there's the quiet MPA, which pretty much is not a marine protected area, which pretty much allows no shipping traffic. That's not maybe the most reasonable thing, because I doubt that they'll not let the fishing continue, the fishing vessels be able to go down there. But my purpose was to hopefully restrict the cruise ships, because a lot of the tourists seem to, like there was an incident where someone took a penguin into the cabin and try to take it home with them. So there's a lot of not understanding of, how these pristine areas and marine mammals live, and marine species live, and it's better to just have a lot less shipping traffic going down there. If we can't do that, I would like to incorporate speeding restrictions. Also restrict the number of vessels allowed in a certain time period. Restrict the vessel size, so ones that are like smaller, that would create less impact, and then integrate an innovative designs to the ships in order to make them less noisy. So these are the MPAs currently in Australia. So the ones in the light blue, the Rossi region MPA and the South Orkney Island MPA have already been established. The other ones are in the process or proposed for the treaty to be able to, the treaty constituents to be able to ratify. So currently there is an MPA being proposed by Chile and Argentina right around the Antarctic Peninsula, currently where I did my study. And I want to incorporate, it's geared around climate change, but I wanted to incorporating the sound management into it. So I proposed part of that to help them incorporate a kind of an ecosystem-based approach to addressing, all other issues besides just climate change, because they're all kind of wrapping up together. So you can't compromise the needs of many for the benefit of the few that can afford to come down to these cruises, which the average price of these is at least $15,000. And I just think that that's not really fair for the entire world to be able to have to compromise for that. And I just want to give acknowledgements to my advisor, which was Doug Nowacek, Allison Stempert, and I also received a lot of geospatial help from Jesse Cleary. And with that, I'll take any questions.